I once worked with a sales team that was losing six-figure deals right as they approached the finish line. Oh, so frustrating. Their prospects were choosing the competition over and over again. And we were like, why? What's going on? Oh, they wanted a cheaper option. Oh, they went with the more enterprisey competitor. Oh, they needed features that we didn't have. And this was like kind of puzzling and frustrating. Reps would be going into calls with whatever competitive intel they could scrape together for each deal. It was just like a different conversation every single time. Asking prospects, hey, what are you considering? Why are you looking at those other tools? And you can imagine how that went. It was like showing up to a debate without knowing your opponent's talking points. The reps would spend half the calls listening to how great the competitor was, scribbling down, frantic notes, typing on Slack, do we have intel on this? And then trying to wing a rebuttal, like in real time. And meanwhile, the competitor had been in the deal for weeks, spoon-feeding the prospect some of their positioning. Now, the sales team I was working with got frustrated and demoralized. They were losing deals they knew they should have won, but they just didn't have the information that they needed shared among all of the reps. Some reps knew more than others, and some were more successful than others. So we decided to build an in-depth competitive intelligence process. And when I say in-depth, I mean kind of going overboard. There's no kill like overkill. So I'll tell you more about that in a bit. But essentially, this meant starting with tons of research, competitive research, and fact-finding interviews. It involved largely three things. One, clear evidence-backed comparisons that were honest about where we excelled and where we didn't. Two, battle cards that armed sales with specific talking tracks for different competitor personas. And three, proactive usage, meaning we didn't wait for a prospect to bring up a competitor. We led the conversation to where we knew we were stronger. We always leaned on our strengths. And that really started just with me writing. I wrote a lot, probably too much. I handed in this 3,000 word competitive article, which was like my client versus this competitor. And it was long enough to be an ebook. It was way more than just like an article. And when I turned it in, I said, listen, I know this is probably a bit much, but I think it's really thorough and good. And we went through a few rounds of revisions and a lot of people got their eyes on it. And there were some arguments about like, can we be this objective? Can we talk about our shortcomings this publicly? And, ultimately they decided to be honest, objective, and humble, and they published the very long, objective, competitive article. And the difference was dramatic right away. The reps stopped sounding defensive on calls and started sounding like trusted and informed advisors. They were able to say, yeah, competitor X has that feature, but here's why customers in your industry still choose us. And that shift from reaction to proaction shortened our sales cycles and increased win rates. Now, the first article that I wrote shot to #1 on Google right away. It was awesome to see for several important keywords. And then I wrote several more. They were between like 3,500 and 5,000 words. All these articles shot to #1 and the feedback was pretty incredible. People were sharing these things on Reddit and social media, talking about how objective they were, picking apart facts, seeing if they could nitpick anything. And it was fantastic to see such a level of interest. And then it completely changed my clients' win-loss numbers. Like, they started winning deals. They were leaning on these articles and getting incredible feedback from their prospects, which was huge. It took a few months, but huge change. And many companies think of competitive analysis as something they like dust off once a year for the board deck. Or maybe they write a couple slides, put some logos on it, a few cherry pick quotes from Gartner, and then they move on. But in reality, competitive analysis isn't just some static artifact that lives on a drive somewhere. It's a living, breathing part of your sales enablement toolkit. And when you do it right, it becomes a key closing tool that works like magic for your sales team. So good competitive analysis is more than just, that cool chart or table with checks and X's. It actually provides a lot of written context and insight into why certain features or capabilities matter for certain buyers. Not everyone's buying for the same reason. So this type of content shows you how to lean into your strengths and when to acknowledge a shortcoming, but pivot to a broader value proposition. And it's helpful for more than just your sales team too. Like, marketing is going to use it for positioning. The product team can use it for roadmap prioritization. The leadership team can use it to make strategic moves. moves in the market. Just great competitive analysis can be hugely impactful. It's like a big lever. You can move anything with this kind of article. And here's what it should include. Like I said, the competitive matrix. You want to make sure it's honest and accurate, and you want to have all the features listed in rows, but you want to describe them in ways that don't insult the buyer's intelligence. Like, know who you're writing for, know what they are looking for, and really include those features. You want to have scenario-based positioning. So that's like guidance for how to respond when a competitor is better in one area but worse in another. You don't want to obviously have a competitive article that's all about how the competition is better. You want to give them some points, they're better in these areas. You also want to have proof points like case studies, testimonials, third-party reports, anything that you can find that backs up the claims you're making in your sales process. You also want to have pricing insights that stick within the legal and ethical boundaries. You might have pricing information that you got, kind of behind the scenes that maybe you shouldn't have, that's not appropriate to share, publicly. Or maybe you don't want to share your own numbers because, let's face it, 5 and 6 figure contracts always have wiggle room. And, if you need to increase your price or, there's more opportunity, like numbers, you can play with them. But if they're written and out in public, pricing can kind of weaken your argument depending on how specific you get. And finally, you want to make sure these things have objectivity, these articles. You want them to be objective because nobody is reading them with the bias that you have. They're not reading it to figure out why, like if I wrote something, I wouldn't be like, oh man, people really are going to hear why Edify content is better than the competition. Actually, they're coming to me hoping I can help them make a decision, whether it's for me or for something else. Like, I want my prospects to succeed. And that's the spirit that makes these competitive analysis pieces function. We also need to keep it current, which is it's not something you can do, at the start. Obviously, you want it to be current at that point, but outdated competitive content can do more harm than good. So you need to keep this thing constantly updated. If your battle card says like competitor Y doesn't have feature Z and they launched it last quarter, well, you've lost some credibility because the reader is going to go, well, if they're wrong about this, what else are they wrong about? In addition to staying on top of your competition, you also want to include real-world feedback from the field. So sales teams, they should be your eyes and ears and feeding back content about what they hear in the market. So your enablement team, hopefully Edify content, can update those materials in near real time for you. And finally, let's address the sort of elephant in the room. Competitive analysis can feel a little bit icky, dirty to some teams. Like, I don't want to write about the competitor. I don't want to learn all about them. People worry about crossing lines or being seen as negative. You don't want to trash the competition because if you do, you're actually trashing the prospect who's considering the competition. It would be like saying, if you don't have Edify content writing your B2B sales content and you're going with this competitor, like, you need your head examined. It's kind of insulting. What you want is your prospect to feel like, oh, Edify has my best interests at heart and they want to help me make a good decision. So you need to help your buyer make an informed decision based on what matters to them, what they care about. After they read your competitive analysis, you want them to feel good about their decision, even if they don't go with you. And when you do it respectfully and accurately, your competitive analysis actually builds trust instead of eroding it. And you never know, by the time they go to sign that contract, there could be something that makes the whole deal fall apart, and then they might come back to you and ask for a deal. Or working with the competition doesn't go so well for the first couple of months, and then they come back to you later. So you always want to be respectful, not just to nurture the lead or the prospect, but your content is like a way of showing respect to them. So, strong competitive analysis content allows your sales team to walk into any deal knowing exactly where they stand and how to position themselves for a win. They don't need to scramble mid-call or make vague promises they can't back up because they feel confident, they're prepared, and they're using content to guide the conversation instead of just playing catch up and, responding to accusations or, odd questions about what you may or may not offer. Because at the end of the day, competitive analysis is just about one thing. You want to control a narrative before someone else does it for you. You want someone to feel like, hey, I look at the world the way that you do, and I want to continue, talking to you and eventually do business with you. All right. That covers the core assets. Like, this is kind of the last video in the series, although we have a couple more videos in this series. But in terms of like the core assets of what will guide a buyer from awareness to decision, I think we've covered everything. But now we need to think about, how do people actually find all of this content that you're producing, like white papers and case studies and competitive analysis, in the first place? And all of that comes down to foundational content that just makes you visible. It's not sales enablement as much as it is just table stakes. And that's blog articles and social media. So in our final video, we will discuss the role of these types of content and tackle the huge debate that every marketer is facing today. Is SEO dead in the age of AI? And sales teams are probably thinking, is SEO content even relevant anymore? So we'll talk about that in the next video.